I had an interesting. I didn't hear it. I actually read an interesting statistic from one of the more recent Pew polls, Pew surveys, and I won't tell you the result of that survey yet before I ask you this question. So I'm going to ask you the question. It's one I'm really looking for an answer from you about. Why do most Christians invite their friends to come to church?
It's easy.
Why do most Christians invite their friends to come to church? Now, and listen to what I'm asking. Christians, why do most Christians, and even if we're going to go a little further, I don't know if I want to do church attendance. Why do most Christians invite their friends to come to church?
It's easier, and most of the time their friends have the same beliefs they do.
Okay. So,
A different part of the question than what I.
so Sarah's suggesting that friends have similar beliefs, and so it's an easy kind of invite. I want you to hold on to that because I don't know if I'll do it now, but I'm going to challenge that for us at some point in time, but maybe not today.
It's easier to invite them,
Mhm.
but it's also easier for them to say no. And so, because sometimes when you invite them, they still don't come
Okay.
because that's happened to us.
Okay, good.
Okay, so I want to put that out there. That
Appreciate that.
right. And so sometimes talking to an absolute stranger is outside your comfort zone. So there.
So the cat litter gentleman is a tougher situation to have than your friend, and so I want us to focus less on and I find this a funny word these days, and at the moment I'm just going to chuckle in my own head. It's difficult to talk to the rando as opposed to talking to someone that you know. Okay.
I think it's backwards. I think it's the other way around a lot of times. A lot of times people can be your friends, but you're really not sure about their faith. And you're like, if I mention this, then they're gonna like kind of avoid me because of that. Because I'm gonna keep asking them.
Yep.
They're gonna think that, and maybe they don't believe it's gonna cause tension in our relationship.
Yep.
So you don't. I mean, I'd rather have people would rather have the cat litter guy or whatever whoever's around that you don't know and
Yep.
say, I appreciate that, or no, that's just not the thing. And then you're like, oh, yeah.
You can let it go.
Maybe, I don't know, but you don't worry about losing that friend or causing any awkwardness.
And I'll go back there. Okay, so that's actually the theme that we've tackled in past teaching, which is, and it was probably 2 trainings ago, we talked about the fact that we don't invite our friends sometimes because it's uncomfortable for us. See, and we're on the wrong theme, but I'm glad that Chris brought this up. If you have the answers to the universe, it makes sense to keep inviting your friend, to keep inviting your friend, to keep inviting your friend, because you want your friend to avoid this thing I'm going to talk about in a couple moments. So it would make sense to do that. The reason that you stop doing it is because it's uncomfortable for you.
Well, and sometimes your friends, depending on their own beliefs, they may already have a church place. So,
Yep.
so sometimes it's an easy cop out too
Yep.
to say, well, I invited them, but they already have a home church that they really like, and so forth and so on. And then other times, eventually you do end up stopping because it doesn't go anywhere.
Yep.
Right. So I don't know. It might just depend on your personality too, as to who you'd rather talk to.
Okay. And so I would comfortably tell you that the highway that we're on right now is not the one that I'm going to steer us to.
Yeah, I thought your answer when you said it's easier, I thought your answer was going to be different.
Because
I thought you were going to say it's easier because you invite that friend, because you invite them to come hear the guy, as opposed to you actually having to say anything.
Mm.
I
Didn't think of it that way.
think the question was, why do you invite them?
Correct.
Oh,
The answer is I don't have to go and say, well, what do you think about Christ? Whereas I can let this guy up here, he's the experts, will explain it all to them,
I didn't think of
and then
it.
they can react to him as opposed to me.
And I think that is the exit off of which I would like us to turn on to. And Steve's right on this, is that I would suggest, and if you want to challenge us, we can do this over the next couple minutes, that most Christians invite their friends to come to church when they believe that the teaching is good, that it's sound, that it's doctrinal. So if you want to push back on that, you can before I go into some next points. Yes, sir.
I actually had a couple of different other takes on that, and instead of zeroing in on the word friend,
Yep.
I was zeroing in on the very fact that anybody, Christian or otherwise, would invite somebody. And I came up with really kind of two potential reasons. Number one is a sense of obligation. They're told to invite people and told to invite people. So there's maybe a sense of obligation. They don't invite people.
Yep.
And then number two is kind of like what you said, where the teaching is really, really good.
Yep.
There's something really cool happen, that you might invite someone to church because a certain speaker is going to be there, or a certain program is going to take place, or a certain group's going to perform. So you might invite them for a special event kind of thing.
Okay, and that's why I focus in on the idea of Christians, okay? Because if you're just a person and you attend a church and your church is one that is Rick Warren's church, or your church is David Jeremiah's church, typically you're going to invite people because
It's them.
it's them, right? So Christians will typically invite folks for maybe one of two reasons. One you kind of mentioned. Let's call it 1.5 because I like half things. One is special programs. You get a cantata and it's Christmas time. Typically, Christians will invite people to come to church because it's a special program. Okay? And then the other camp is the one that Gene kind of hovered on, and I'm going to put emphasis on the other one. The other one is typically, in today's world, Christians invite their friends or other people to come to church because the music's really good. Right? In today's climate. But for the most part, Christians invite people to come to church if they believe that the teaching is good and sound. Yes, sir.
Do you have a sense that the typical Christian knows anything about whether or not their teaching at their church is any good?
I have a sense that they have a feeling about it, whether they know it or not.
Okay. It's all about feeling, Dr.
Austin's church.
Right? They have a feeling about it. And I like that what Steve just alluded to. If you remember last week's apologetics pushback, there's a whole lot of folks that are in a building that are going to invite their friends because, first of all, it's that guy's church, and they feel like the teaching is good. Now, the music at that church is way better than the teaching, but folks will also invite people there for the music, but the music is not the big draw at that particular church. It's the guy and his teaching. Pushback, thoughts about that, disagreements? Let me give you a stat that came out through a survey that I'm a little uncomfortable with, and maybe you're not as uncomfortable as I am. The Pew poll results said that of evangelical Christians, 82% believe in a literal hell. Of evangelical Christians, 82% believe in a literal hell.
Why is it not 100?
That is my question.
Okay.
Can you say that loudly so people can hear
I
that?
said, why is it not 100%?
That's my question. So, given my background and how I operate, and I don't know that you've seen this as much, but hopefully you'll hear it today. I believe it's really easy, especially in the educational system, to put emphasis that if a concept is not one that is learned, it's the fault of the
Teacher.
of the learner.
Yes.
Okay, sure, and we're gonna present both of those in a second. My feeling has always been that there's responsibility on the teaching aspect, on the teacher's end, if the learner isn't getting that which they're supposed to get.
But it goes both ways.
It does, and that's where we're gonna launch out on that today. Yes, sir.
Oh, I was still thinking in terms of the other guy.
So if
You're correct if you're assuming a good teaching.
okay, but I would also tell you bad teachers also have an impact on folks. They learn bad things, right? Okay, so the way that we work together, I will tell you very strongly, I work very hard so that the impetus is on me as an instructor, as a facilitator, to do a good job getting you the right information, the best way possible. But it's also incumbent on you all or the people that are receiving information to do their jobs as a
Learner.
as a learner, as a student. Yes, sir.
For one, the 18% Christians don't believe in liberal health.
Evangelicals.
Evangelicals, you said?
Yes, sir. Not just Christians.
Oh,
Yes.
that just sounds strange to me.
Yes, exactly.
Because, and I guess that there is a percentage, maybe that's it, that claim to be evangelical, but they see the Bible as allegorical
Yes.
rather than
Yes.
actual stuff.
Yes.
And the other thing that comes to my mind was I had a parent one time tell me that anytime a student fails, this is as I'm a teacher.
Yes.
Okay. Anytime a student fails, a teacher fails.
Uh-huh.
And that chewed me up. Because I had students that didn't do well.
Right.
And then all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, who is the greatest teacher that ever walked this planet?
Exactly.
And he had to do this.
Yes.
I felt a lot better now.
Yeah, and I'm with you there too. Is I take a lot of onus that that's what my job is, but I recognize that there are going to be a lot of poor students,
Mhm.
or there are going to be a lot of students who they're in class, but because they have to be, they don't really want to be, all of that sort of stuff. And so let me give you another unsettling fact. This is one Ellen and I heard as we were driving into that. So of Catholics, Steve,
All right.
if you want to see a guy making faces today, look at Steve Jenkins. He is the walking poker face, not this one. So, of Catholics, and let me help you understand how unsettling this is, and hopefully this will help us to ramp up where we go, as we said. You all are aware of the monumental Supreme Court stuff that's about to happen, which they shouldn't have weighed in on in '73 anyway, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that very likely is going to be an opinion that's presented that says it's a state's thing as opposed to it's a national endorsement. So of Catholics, even in the face of abortion and in the face of what's happening with the Supreme Court, 56% of Catholics believe abortion should be the choice of the woman. 56%.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure.
So I'm glad that there's some of this exchange happening, because that also, well, and I hear what Chris says back there, and one of the comments that my wife made is this: Catholics have come to believe, if not people in generally the United States, that abortion is a form of
Healthcare.
birth control. It is a form of birth control, right? So,
I mean, that used to be,
So
they didn't allow it, right?
there is a form of life control.
well, in many ways. And so when I hear those kind of stats, the first thing that comes to my mind, and you hear me with this theme regularly, is teaching is not strong and is not sound enough that people understand otherwise, right? But the converse of that is true as well, which is if that is teaching, then the learners have to receive and submit to that which is good and qualitative teaching. But that's a challenge. That's a challenge in our environment. Unfortunately, we're in a day and age where learning is really not embraced the way that it has been in previous generations. Yes, sir.
This may or may not have a place here. I apologize if it's in the wrong place. Michaela is studying in school, and the school is right, upstairs here a little bit. They're studying the Declaration. Okay.
Mhm.
And one of the statements in the Declaration, of course, is we hold these truths as self-evident that all men are created equal,
Right.
etc. Endowed by their creators. We have creation in there and all that kind of thing. And I got to thinking about how can people who endorse this document also endorse, 100 years later, slavery, or maybe even less.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden it dawned on me their definition of all men. So some folks weren't considered people.
That's
Which is the very same thing that Francis Schaeffer put out when he did his film series called How Should We Then Live?
Yeah.
Where the fetus is not considered a person and therefore it's not a murder.
In today's economy.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so it's a philosophy thing.
Actually, at the time, they did realize that they realized the contradiction in it.
Mm-hmm.
Jefferson
Yes.
especially said
Yes.
he understood that I'm writing that all men are created equal, but we don't treat people. So it wasn't Jefferson who wrote it. Did not really. He saw them as people as equal. But there were other issues with him in regards to
It was culture.
It was cultural. It was economic.
Correct.
There were legal reasons. Like if you were in debt, and most farmers, plantation owners were in debt, you could not legally free your slaves because that's considered fraud.
Correct.
Right, okay. Anyway, that was the way I kind of did it in my mind. I'm like, okay, so maybe what they had trouble with was the definition of a person back then, and that's how they justified slavery back then. And that's, like I said, I apologize for the wrong place.
Well, it's not the wrong place. It's just more of a historical discussion, and Steve and I would love to indulge on that, because the percentages that you take a look at that are a part of the discussion declaration constitution is one that builds in that you can't. There's a voting block issue that gets created when you own slaves and they're either a full person or their property.
Right.
So you've got to kind of juxtapose that. So that's a different historical discussion for
Right.
another
They
time.
actually came to the place where a slave was, or an African American
A percentage.
was like a fifth of a person.
percent.
So it took 5 slaves, if you will, to make one person, which is disgusting.
Well, that's actually that was actually an anti-slavery measure for me to actually look at it
Correct.
historically.
Correct. And that's why this is a different
We
discussion.
just had that
It's history
conversation this
oriented.
week, because he was
Right.
explaining it to me.
And that's a person with a progressive mindset working against the culture at hand to be able to change the culture but not offend folks in the current climate. So I would tell you, if you want to see an example of what we are on a tangent. So if you want to see an example of where that blossoms, take a look at the Reconstruction period after the abolitionists kind of win, and there's the emancipation. Because what you see in Congress is where the Klan and the Night Riders and the Democrats come out because of what happens with Congress. So you got to do your studies on the Freedmen's Bureau and the Reconstruction period. Because I will tell you this, and I can get away with this because it makes it. It scared a lot of white folks. Okay, so take a look at it and you'll see.
Okay.
Because that's ultimately what the progression meant. And if you've got a whole bunch of slaves and then they're freed, uh-oh. Okay,
I apologize for the tangent.
it's okay. Because I'm talking to former slaves to sin.
Absolutely.
So look at that. Okay. So it's incumbent on the teacher to teach well, but it's also incumbent on the learner to do their part. And so when I read numbers that say only 82% of evangelicals believe in a literal hell, for me, the first thing that resonates is somebody's not teaching.
Mm-hmm.
When I say, or when I read that Catholics, who by definition are anti-abortion, that 56% believe that it's okay to practice abortion, I say that the churches, the leadership, and the teaching are not doing their jobs. But the other part of that is the learners aren't embracing or don't know enough about what it is they're doing in order to have the right attitude, the right perspective.
And sometimes those Catholics are not Catholics that are observant or faithful to the church. They're cultural Catholics, like some folks are cultural Jewish. So they say they're Catholic because they grew up Catholic and they did the certain things and that kind of thing, but they're not necessarily observant. So they may say they're Catholic. They back in the old days had a St. Christopher, but they still think that abortion's okay.
Okay, and I say that applies to evangelicals as well.
I agree.
Okay. So having said that, we're embarking on a new study today. Before we embark on that new study, what I would like to do is to ask you some themes from the study we're leaving. Here's why. We don't do Lifeway. But Lifeway is a study that breaks down the Bible into component parts so that you're teaching a lesson every week and then you move on to the next lesson. So we take a year to do one study. But if we move on to the next study and none of that is retained or makes any sense, then it might as well be Lifeway or some other tool, because it means that the learners aren't walking away with things that they can use. So before we start today, I'm going to ask you all, what are some of the themes from the study we just finished?
Amazing.
Thank you.
Well,
Appreciate that.
if you think it's amazing, then you should act like it. You
Appreciate
should
that.
show it.
Yes.
And you should live it.
Thank you. Whoa. You want to switch places?
No, no.
Absolutely.
don't want to switch places. I mean, because, you know, if you do take some time to think about it and to look at the pieces, you're kind of like, you know, this is pretty stinking amazing. And yet we don't act like it. Now, granted, 50, 60 years ago, people did because it was a very different, not society's not the right word, but very different system then, right? But now people have gotten so far away from that, you just don't even realize how amazing it is that we have this grace.
Tip. We're way too cool for Jesus.
I don't think he's too cool.
But the way I live says,
Well,
I'm too cool. I'm too cool for Jesus.
Well, and that begs another question.
Yes, sir.
And that is, somehow along the line, Christians have been stamped as square.
Okay.
You know, and so if you're a Christian, you're out of step. You're not following what's going on, and you're not endorsing the popular trends of the day. And let's face it, Christianity typically is about 10 years behind the rest of society with a lot of different things.
probably more than that, because a lot of people think of it as being antiquated because it no longer, things that were in the Bible don't apply to us today.
It doesn't conform to our culture.
Right.
Okay.
And, you know, because we want to do what we want to do.
Okay.
Go look at Judge.
I'm on Sarah's boat. So I'm going to say I embrace the Huey Lewis philosophy when it comes to the statement you just made.
The Huey Lewis statement? Which
Yep.
one is that?
Say it loudly, brother.
It's hip to be square.
It's hip to be square.
Okay.
Yeah, forget it, Gene.
Sorry.
It's
That's because I'm square and I don't get all that
it's
stuff.
here to be square. If being a square suggests eternal life and some of the other things we just finished talking about, it's him.
Exactly.
But shouldn't
To
we
be
be working
square.
to make more squares?
You bet.
I mean, shouldn't we be doing that?
You bet.
And sometimes it's not even outright that you're doing it, but a lot of times it's what you do and don't do that influence others around you, maybe in ways you don't even know.
Yes. Agreed.
Billy Sunday used to have an impact upon the alcohol trade in the town as people got saved and they were less inclined to go to that place to get their you know, moonshine, whatever.
Okay. Billy Sunday, huge evangelical pastor preacher in Chicago.
Yeah.
Huge.
Sad thing is his children did not buy in.
Okay. So see the Bible. We have three patriarchs where that works, right? Aaron, Eli, and Samuel. So we see, let alone Solomon, King David. We got a whole bunch.
Yeah,
So that's not isolated.
yeah.
What else? Other things.
And talking about Sarah's thing about showing others through maybe what we don't do or how we behave in certain situations and things like that. But also, probably one of the hardest ones sometimes for me is we tend to want to quote unquote evangelize to others outside, you know, as we go through our day, but it's harder for our family.
Okay.
So I know we had discussions about, you know, making sure that our family,
Mhm.
that we ask those questions that are hard to ask
Yeah.
about, you know, where are you with Jesus?
Yeah.
What does he mean to you? What is he in you? How do you show that?
Yeah.
Still struggling sometimes with things like that. And I hate, and I almost did, but was up here yesterday.
Yep.
And I'm not 100% sure, I think, but I'm not 100% sure. But he had brought up a friend,
Yep.
which I've known for years too with him. And so I never really asked the question,
Yeah.
but I want to,
But you didn't.
but I did. So I blew.
Okay. I appreciate you sharing that. I would say you blew it. Now, you all have to gauge that for yourselves, but that's been a lot of the theme since January of 2022. Is you can't assume. You got to take the temperature. And if we're struggling with doing that with the people that are closest to us, I can tell you, I'm going to take a little bit of responsibility as the facilitator, but the rest of the onus is on you to do. So if you knew that there was an opportunity and you passed it up, that's on you, because trying every week to remind you to do that. All right, what else? Other things. Put your notes if you have
That's
them.
what I was gonna do.
And this, I was good.
Anybody understand why we're taking time to do this? Doesn't make sense to go into, especially the next study that's related to this, if the last one doesn't have any impact.
Well, plus, you got to take some ownership. Well, not you. We have to take ownership too.
I'd like to think so.
I mean, we send stuff out, so you get time to do it.
So let me share something odd with you, and this is a little bit adjacent. What we're discussing right now is almost a challenge I've had for Pastor Bruce for years. And the challenge I've had with Pastor Bruce, and I don't revisit this with him the same way, we do it differently these days, is this. How can you week after week after week say the same and similar things using different projections, different accounts from the Bible, and there's no change? There's no difference. And I would tell you, typically, when some of that begins to set in, that's when your leaders and your pastors decide to go elsewhere, to look elsewhere, to see if they will have a different impact, especially if the Lord's called them elsewhere. Because when you plow the same ground and you're putting in the right things, corn one year, you rotate it out, you're putting in tobacco, you rotate it out, you're putting in cotton, and you're getting very little, it makes you think you need to buy a new farm. Other things, what else you got? Virtual folks, anything?
Something that I want to put over my doorway is only things that we do for Jesus remain.
Appreciate that. Yeah. It's a real challenge to not be distracted by the stuff of life. School, family, bills, the job. And then heap anything else in there that you want to. Only the stuff that you do for Jesus is going to matter. And maybe in a lot of our lives right now, it feels like we're going to be around forever. It feels like we're going to get around, we'll get the chance to get around to it. I can tell you, when I look at stats and when I look at some of the interesting news stories, there are people who thought they had tomorrow and then they don't. There are people who are banking on tomorrow and then they don't. And then what happens is those of us who remain get real saddened by the fact that they're gone. So the way that we minimize the sad is by taking advantage of the thing that Sherry said that she didn't take advantage of. You got to ask somebody about their tomorrow and eternity today. Because then that helps us to have fewer tears when they're dead. Because then we're not too worried about them. We're worried for ourselves mostly because I'm going to miss them. But in the long term, not really. And that's a hard mindset to get your head around. It really is. And I can tell you, as we get old, that's a discussion my wife and I have pretty regularly. What happens if we both die in a crash? What happens if we predecease? What happens then? So life decisions, in many ways, you need to be making those now, and they're not about your life and your plans, they're about your eternity. Because the stuff you acquire and accumulate in the friendships, in many ways, if you're a believer in Jesus, that stuff, if you have friends that believe in Jesus, you get to continue. But other than that, all the other acquisition is done. Other stuff, other things.
I think one of the overarching themes for the entire study was basically for squares to live out loud. It's kind of, and we talked about this in a lot of different ways. When Linda comes up to me, who's a neighbor down the hill here, and if I see her coming, I can go Giants, and she'll be right there with it.
Right.
The Giants.
Correct.
Her car is decked out with Giants sorts of decoration.
Right.
Or you see someone that's got an old Redskins thing on their car. Or, you see someone coming with a Virginia Tech jersey and hat and shoes or whatever, you know, they're living out loud the thing that they're endorsing, and
Correct.
we don't really do that.
Yeah. We don't think it's cool. We don't think Jesus is very cool. You're right.
Sure, this has been discussed over this period, but it's something that I'm reading lately. It's been said a couple of times, and each time it's really struck me and convicted me. And again, I blew it. But the thing was, it was what are you doing with Jesus?
Right.
You know, so it's like, oh, what am I doing with Jesus? Am I sticking him in my back pocket,
Right.
or am I, trying to give him to others, or
Right.
share him with others, or am I just hiding him?
Right.
So.
I can tell you, that's really close to Ellen and my heart. Is you got to find an opportunity during the course of the day to take the elf off the shelf and say, "Be an elf." You've got you. Most of us take the Jesus philosophy and we stick it in our pocket until Sunday. And that's not what it's supposed to be, folks. It's not this. This is not church. Church is what you do out there. So yes. It's what are we doing? So it's not only what am I doing for an opportunity to show my being a square, but what am I doing to live out loud? And so the very fact that people, especially here in Virginia, I would almost say south of Maryland, if it's not Duke, if it's not Virginia, if it's not Tech, if it's not State, we've got sports nuts that live in these areas. But I don't see people necessarily, unless you've got like an ictus on the back of your car, or maybe a WJ, a what would Jesus do kind of thing. We don't have people living their faith out loud.
And I apologize, Bruce. Tech came to mind before the Cavaliers. I apologize.
Any other things? Yes, sir.
Well, I just think that what I take out of it, it's great. I'm thinking grace. I'm thinking that it's both simple and it's complex, because it's very simple. It's simple in the fact that what you need to do is just understand and believe it.
Right.
The thing about it is, it's very complex for us, because in our nature we don't want. It's almost too simple. For us,
Yes.
because we want to feel like, well, I did something to sort of earn this, and it's hard to understand and wrap your head around the fact that the creator of the heavens and earth, who created you to glorify him, and you screwed that up. And so then he has to go and pay the price that you can't pay. And he still gets the glory from that because you screw it up. Yep. And what you just have to do is trust him. We don't like that, because I'm not really all that necessary to that equation. And I think that's part of the reason, because as you said, I think there's two things. I think that going back to your original polls, I don't think that churches have gone away from teaching about hell, and we teach about, I don't know, how to live a better life, or how to be stress free, or I don't know, something.
All that Osteen stuff.
Right.
You misteach Jeremiah.
Yeah, I mean, it's stuff like that. But you don't focus on health. So when it comes out, when your average church person is out in public and they come into a situation where they're talking to somebody, they don't feel comfortable bringing that up, or talking to them about Jesus, because what if they ask me a question? I can't. Well, grace is really simple, but I don't know if I can explain it to somebody, because you're not all that necessary to it. So I think that's part of the issue.
That's really a perfect springboard as an introduction to where we are with our new study. What you just said is the perfect springboard that helps to dovetail into what we're going to begin studying today. And unless we understand that which you all have shared, and then its culmination with what Steve's statement is, this next study is going to be pointless for you, because you've got to understand kind of where we've come from to understand where we're going. And what Steve just suggested is very, very key. That's where we're going to focus, which is we've just talked about amazing grace, amazing imputation. Should I really be amazed? So our current study is going to be called, it's going to be called Grace in Action, Grace Displayed. And the subtitle of that is anything he can do, I can do better. And you've got to get it because it's based on a lot of the background, a lot of the foundation we've spent a year and a half doing previous to this is now where we are. We're going to take a look at this thing that Steve talks about, which is so simple, but in many ways so complex for us to get our heads around to the point where we'd rather not get our heads around it and we don't really value it because it's just too daunting. So let me read our scripture passage first, which I think is going to be 1 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10. Look at there. Okay. Is it 2 Corinthians?
2 Corinthians. Sorry, 2 Corinthians.
So let me read this. That's a whole book, though, by missing it there. So when I read this passage, it shouldn't be a new passage for you, but perhaps we'll look at it in a way that's maybe different because we're not going to just look at this from Paul's perspective. We're going to look at it from y'all's perspective, from our perspective. Okay? So in my NIV, which I'm reading from today, it's titled at the beginning of 12's, the book of the 12th chapter, Paul's vision and his thorn. Okay? So 7 begins to keep me from becoming conceited. Please, please, please think very much about that word. That word doesn't mean that you're necessarily a cheerleader of the football squad. It means when you are self-centered. It is about you.
The New American Standard reads, to keep me from exalting myself.
Yes, sir. And most of us are the gods of our own domain. Okay? So to keep me from becoming conceited because of these surpassingly great revelations, and you'll have to read the before stuff.
Exactly.
So you understand what he's meaning, what he's talking about. There was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulty. For when I am weak, then I am strong. This is almost the most un-American passage in the Bible. This does, excuse me, sir?
I said interesting comment.
This does not describe the American mindset.
Because he stopped at 3.
Well, I don't know that Americans are persistent these days if we put our hands up, but Americans are not about losing.
They're not about hardships. They're not about being persecuted. They're not about insults because everybody's got some really thin skin.
Absolutely. That's the cancel culture. That's
Correct.
the identification culture. Yes.
We don't want to do that.
Correct. Yes, young lady.
Can you, I just got completely lost in that.
Yeah.
Can you say it?
Yeah, sure. The Lord allowed Paul to experience some really amazing things, almost to the point where he gets carried up into the heavens to be able to see things that he doesn't write about.
Not allowed to.
Correct. Paul also refers elsewhere that he has all of the gifts of the Spirit. There's healing that's involved, there's speaking, there's translating, there's administration, there's teaching. He's got all of these gifts, in part because the Lord kind of met him personally and said, tag.
You're it.
And then the passage goes on. And by the way, I appreciate you saying, can you say this in regular people talk? Because that's kind of why we avoid the Bible. Because sometimes this language in this situation, it eludes us. So Paul says, so instead of me, because look at this. You guys know of, if not preachers, pastors, churches, where the guy there kind of walks on water. You saw one last week, right? So Paul says to keep me from getting my head too big and from patting myself on the back and going, I'm Jesus's main dude. Something, we don't know what it is, whether it is a physical ailment or even potentially a social ailment or some other beguilement, but it seems like it's flesh, it's in his body. Something happened for him that made him need to beg the Lord to say, can you get rid of this? I'd be more effective for you if you got rid of this. And the Lord, after he asked 3 times, basically says, nope. The fact that you need to rely on me makes my power through you even more evident and even more obvious. And so the more that you have to rely on me, the less of you there is. And Paul then responds to that by saying, so I've learned to be incontent and all such things. But so Paul says that I can deal with the insults, the persecution, the hardship, because when I'm basically at my lowest and I have nothing left, that's when Jesus is able to shine and work through me. And I will boast about him than boasting about my own accomplishments. Does that do okay, paraphrase? Did I miss something, Bruce?
Kind of keeps them in place, keeps them as.
And check.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me give you a different example of it, Old Testament wise, and it might work for you with a visual. Jacob is wrestling with who we believe to be a pre-incarnate Jesus. And Jesus, while he's wrestling with him, says, all right, you need to let go of me now. And Jacob says, nope, not doing that. Not letting you go till you bless me. And so this pre-incarnate Jesus wrestling with him goes, okay, I'm going to bless you.
Right there.
What are you doing now?
Touches his hand and in some ways dislocates it. So what we believe, even though we don't see this, is Jacob, who was formerly an agile, good runner, see Esau,
Not so much.
now probably has a limp for the rest of his life. And the limp is a reminder that he's got to run. He asked the Lord to bless him, but he's got a perpetual reminder that he needs to rely on Jesus, the Lord, Yahweh's strength to get him through every day. There's a constant reminder. That's what's going on with Paul. Make sense? So when Paul gets to be too big in his own britches, or he's bigger than his britches, he gets to go, oh, no, can't get through the day unless I rely on the Lord to relieve me of this in some regard. On target?
One little note here.
Yes, sir.
Just a slight difference.
Yes, sir.
In the New American Standard. Verse 7 reads, because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, for this reason, to keep me from exalting myself, there was given me a thorn in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me, to keep me from exalting myself. He repeats it. And typically, New American Standard is a word-for-word translation.
Right.
So that means it probably appears in there twice, just so that he gets the message, just so that I don't get too big for my britches.
That's like a verily, verily.
Exactly.
Okay?
Now that I read it, that's what I have too.
Yeah.
It makes complete sense. But at first I was like,
So you know what, Chris, and I appreciate this. When Brother Gene is going to wonderfully and eloquently present later, there are not opportunities for people to go, excuse me, what does therefore mean? Because that interrupts the flow. It interrupts the service. It interrupts what's going on. And that's not how we do church. But I will comfortably tell you the reason that likely Paul could preach all doggone day to the point where somebody falls out of a window and goes to sleep.
We're lucky.
Right? See Delaney. So how somebody falls out of the window and breaks their neck is because Paul was probably stopping to take questions when people said, excuse me, I learned this from my rabbi, and you're going to say what? And he took time to push back and ask and answer questions. We don't create an environment in our churches where people get to go, excuse me, who's Jacob? And what's Esau? I don't get it. And we need to do that. It's important. Okay? So this sets the table for our study. Grace in action, grace displayed. Anything he can do, can do better. So you have some questions that have been presented to you because as adults, if we just start teaching the Bible, that ain't necessarily going to fly. So let's ask y'all about y'all. And the first question I think that's asked here is, how do you value your independence? Here you go. How important is independence to you? Please explain your answer. I want you to think, our preamble, this discussion here about the Bible passage, as well as reading the Bible passage, and some of your comments. How important is independence to you? And I want you to think about what Steve said as well. How important is independence to you? Please explain your answer.
I had a question when I read that question, and I have not asked it yet, so I'm gonna ask it now.
Mhm.
And the question is, are we speaking of our Declaration of Independence and independence from another country? Or are we talking about our ability to function on our own regardless of what other people do?
Yes, your self-sufficiency.
Okay, this is one of the things that I used to like to do as a teacher. It was one of those things where it was fun, and I know you love doing this because you love watching people. You ask the question, if you can think on your own, raise your hand. And what happens is, I gotta look at who else is raising their hand. So we're not really independent because we have a tendency to want to go with the culture. And you know what? To not go with the culture is square. And we go back to that.
Correct.
If you're going to think on your own, you're going to be independent. You're going to say things that go against the flow and swim upstream. You're going to have to be very independent.
So if we had Brother Trent Dees joining us, who is AWOL or doing whatever it is he's doing, he would respond.
Right now, man.
He would respond to what you say by referring to the mob mentality, which is really how, if not Americans, I would say a lot of church people operate according to mob mentality. And I think Gene's depiction is a wonderful one. Ellen and I have told you the story about how we got in trouble in a church for not being a part of a standing ovation when we didn't agree with that. But how a standing ovation typically happens?
One person starts.
One
everybody
person
follows.
starts, and other people figure out or decide, I better stand too.
It's like the wave
It is like the way.
in the stadium,
Is it?
right?
And the first person was a plant anyway.
Possibly. See Sinatra and the Bobby Sox.
So I cannot lie with my answer because my family will know if I lie with this answer. They will, right?
Yep.
To me, it's important because I don't like to rely on others. Yep. So see, they agree with me, but I can't lie because if I were to say, "Oh,
Well,
It's not
especially
important.
put a fierce sign in front of independent.
You put fiercely in front of independent.
well, we don't like to rely on others," it's hard for us to rely on somebody else. I mean, okay, so you think about work situations too.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, it's hard to delegate
Yes.
to people, even though you know you should.
Yes.
But if you want something done right, I'm
Yes.
I'm just saying because so
Yes.
I mean, independence is important, but I'm learning you have to find a balance, right?
Yes.
Because I mean, independence is good. I said I'm learning.
The family speaks.
I'm a work in progress with it. It's a slow process, but I mean, it's hard. It is very hard to rely on somebody else or to yeah.
Never worked.
That's a good word. Okay, I'll be quiet now.
Well, your son's face.
I know. Aren't you glad he's back home?
This corner of the room. Nathan hasn't stopped the bobblehead since we started this track of questioning.
Aren't you glad he's back?
Well, yeah, because with a year of college under his belt, there's some experiences and some truths that he knows that we either don't know or that we haven't been exposed to for a while. So it's going to be neat to get his perspective while he hangs out with us. If you want something done,
Right.
Right.
does it yourselves. That is, look, if that's not the theme of people everywhere, that is definitely the theme of Americans. One of our very, very good friends is a doctor, and he runs an ER trauma unit. But his challenge is, I'd rather not work with nurses and other people. In fact, let me tell you something odd that he said based on this. He said, you guys know how sometimes there's an emergency that happens on a plane? And when the emergency happens on a plane, the professionals say,
Is there a doctor?
is there a doctor?
A doctor
So-
in the plane, in the house.
So when he was a young doctor, he used to respond to them. But now that he's an older doctor, he never responds to it. And he never responds to it because he believes that all these people rush there to the situation and nobody knows what to do. Because everybody wants to acknowledge that they're a doctor, but they don't really have a plan as to how to do what they're going to do. So he'd rather sit back and wait for the cacophony. And then when they say, we don't know what to do here, then he steps in. Because he knows how to, and I'm not saying this in a quality way, he knows what to do best, and he'd rather not work with other people until it's necessary, if it's necessary. He knows what needs to happen best. And so that's been part of the lecture series that he and I have about this same thing, which is if you want something done right, do it yourself. But I would say, let me give you a different scenario, and it's not full on at all. Michael Jordan was a sports star who had the do it right, do it yourself attitude. That's how he could score 63 points in the playoff game. But he had to learn something along the way, which is there are 4/7 other guys, no, 11 other guys on a team. You need to get them involved. And some of that involves teaching, training, relinquishing, delegating. It means you not being independent or being in control all the time. Yes.
So it's kind of interesting you bring him up, and I'm going to bring this up only because we are associated with Liberty, right? So you get Malik, who's gone to the Titans, right?
Mhm.
And you get the quarterback now who says it is not his job to mentor him. And I was actually surprised at that. But it goes back to, I think, your mentality too, where nobody wants to relinquish. There's my word. There's the word.
Yep.
Relinquish control.
Right.
Now you get other quarterbacks, ex-quarterbacks weighing in that it kind of is your job,
Right.
but they don't want to necessarily mentor or teach themselves out of a job.
Yeah, that's the other side of that is when you let go
Mm-hmm.
and you groom somebody, the next thing you know, you're grooming your replacement.
Yeah.
Chris, is that you or is that Bruce?
Just something I wanted to add is, yes, we're independent, and yes, if you want it done right, you got to do it yourself. That is, if you're an expert in that field. You got to recognize your strengths and your weaknesses, because there's sometimes where, yeah, I can do that and I'll do it myself, but then there are things that I know I can't do, and so I need to call on Bob or Joe or Sue, who I recognize them to be better at it than me. So
But
there is evidence, but then there is also the teamwork. For example, your football team.
Yep.
Well, one guy's a quarterback because he's the best quarterback. But the linemen and the receivers, they can't do the quarterback job. Sorry, dog sitting.
But so Chris, you talk about weaknesses too, but then you got to actually admit that you're weak. And sometimes that's hard for people to do too.
Absolutely.
That may be a question that comes up.
Sorry.
I'm exactly. I delegate all the work. I am not the expert. We've migrated 5 or 6 times. I have no clue how to do anything expertly in the system we're in now. But I have a team of 35 people into it. So yeah, I'm very comfortable delegating. But it's been a journey, certainly. My mom died when I was 17, so I've been pretty independent since I was 17 and old. But now as I've aged and realized, my limitations, it's figuring out how to be dependent on others for certain things.
That's a cuss word.
But you learn that, especially at work. I mean, project management, you learn to give it to other people. Now, if you only have a team of 3 and you're one of those 3, you can't give away but so much, right? But I mean, you've got to learn how to do that, and it is a growing process.
There's a pride that gets attacked when we say, I can't do this.
Yes.
Or I need help. And those are words to say. And I do that at work too. So-and-so knows this better than I do. Or I just recently this past week, I had to send off something to the actual manufacturer to find out how does this actually supposed to work, because I can't get it to happen.
Right.
So there's a pride thing when you have to acknowledge that I am not sufficient to this task. It's tough.
So
I think there's times. I think there's times where you do know how, and you are the best. I think Paul was the best preacher. Paul was the best evangelist. Paul was tops in his field. He was the best. You mentioned Jordan. Jordan scored 63 points, and they lost. you know, the reality was Jordan never won a championship until he got Scottie Pippen and the surrounding characters. You mentioned that. Jordan scored crazy points the first, what, 6, 7 years of his career. And because I rooted for him back then. I remember watching them, and he never could get past the Pistons because he didn't have the surrounding characters. He was the best, inarguably. And Gene mentions, Jesus. Jesus kind of, I preached this a couple of weeks ago, I think. Jesus was always the smartest guy in the room, always, every single time. And yet,
Even when he was 12.
even when he was 12.
Even when he was 12.
And yet
Yep.
he said, I need to surround myself with other people to get this task done the way that, because yes, he could have been in more places at once, but he was humanly, he was in one place at one time. So yeah, I think that's where, and Gene mentioned about the pride issue. Even if you do have the capability, and we pastors run into this a lot, I can tell you that lots of times we can do it better than the other people around us in many cases. But
Yeah.
you say, wait a minute, I can only build this work to a certain level by myself. I can't do it without other people. I'm running into that right now. I got a text from my setup guy. His wife had her third baby like 3 days ago, and he just texted me. He says, I don't think I'll be there today. It's like, what? So even something like that. I mean, so yeah, it is a pride thing to say, well, maybe I can do it. But what did Paul say? So that I don't elevate myself, so I don't exalt myself, right? So yeah, you can be Jordan and still need some other people along.
That reminds me of something, that whole Jordan thing. Reminded me of something that I observed years ago. This has been a long time ago. I apologize for dating it. But the Mets went to the World Series. The Yankees didn't. And the reason was the Mets were a team. The Yankees were filled with a whole bunch of stars, but they couldn't operate as a team. They could all, in their own individual realm, perform beautifully, but they couldn't perform together. And teamwork is very, very important, which is what I guess Jordan eventually learned.
Okay, and that's certainly a subset of this independence question, because I appreciate that my wife and Sarah both say it's a process over the years. You learn how to function as a team. Yeah, but sometimes even if you function as a team, and this is kind of the other comment about the Liberty quarterback is you still though can be conceited and work in a team, and that's what this question is about. Is how independent, how important is your independence, and sometimes what that means is, okay, you'll work in a team, but I only condescend to those people when it's necessary, right? So they work in a team, and the team accomplishes, but for the most part, it's what I do that makes the team great. So that's a part of this question as well, is how strongly do you value your independence? And I love sometimes watching Sarah come in and sit up in the morning. It's especially if Steve, Nathan, and Daniel are there, because what happens is they bring in this stuff, and it's like the flying monkeys kind of they bring in all this equipment, and then what happens is they put it down, and then it's almost like the parting of the Red Sea. The guys just move out of the way. This is what I look. And they watch. And what they're doing is peripherally, they're going, if she says something, we'll step in. Other than that, do anything. Don't even let her know we're here. Because when Nate, when he's nodding his head about his mom valuing her independence, there's probably nobody in this room that is as fiercely independent as Sister Sarah Jenkins. And it's funny to watch her watch her boys go, yup. The very concept of what Steve reminded us about, this whole grace thing, and our part in it, it's almost got to go in the opposite trajectory. And that the statement that John the Baptist makes is one we read a whole lot and we just don't value it. he must increase. And I must be made pretty much as like I'm not even here.
Amen.
That don't cut it, folks. And here, let me show you a way. You hear me talk about this a lot. I'll tell you that that really doesn't rate, because look at your obituaries. Your obituaries are lined with he did this, he was this, he left that, but and maybe someplace you get, oh, and he was a member of the church. It is not about Jesus, even in death, for the folks who remain. It's about he was da 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 da. So sometimes this kind of training, this kind of teaching that we're doing, it falls on deaf ears, because for the most part, you're the most important thing in your life. It's like that Gladys Knight the Pip song. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, except you're the best thing that ever happened to you. We're going to look to address the elements of this first question a lot through the course of this study. Grace in action, grace display. We've already talked about it's amazing, how amazing it should be, what you should look like, act like, operate like, if indeed you believe in amazing. Now we're going to take a look at, there's already grace in action. You understand what that looks like. You understand what we discussed. Now we're going to talk about what it looks like. Talk about how it plays out and what some of the stymieing elements are to making that a reality in our lives. Yes, Emily.
So when I was looking at this, and I've never written anything down, but I've been kind of pondering the question and re-looking at it several times, and it kind of keeps changing a little bit. Because the more I looked at it, of course, my initial reaction was to how important it was very. But then as I'm thinking about how to explain it, I'm realizing I'm a whole lot less independent than I first thought I was.
Okay.
Because honestly, when I think about it, you know, there's things that I can do, there's things that I kind of take charge of, but in the overall scheme of things, I'm dependent still on my husband.
Yep.
Because without his income,
Yep.
I couldn't live in the home that I live in.
Yep.
I'm dependent on my employer to keep me employed. You know, I'm dependent on a lot of things that I don't always think about.
Yep.
And so I'm kind of realizing even though I feel like I'm independent, I'm not really independent. I'm still dependent on a lot of things. And so as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about this. And so that's really where my dependency is, because without Jesus, I would have nothing.
So you're talking about what we just came out of in our study is valuing. You just mentioned that you value your employer, you value your husband, and then you capped it off with that we should value Jesus. Right. Because you value your husband, because you value your job, that's a way to be able to look at this question and recognize as much as I value my independence, there's a whole lot of things I'm actually dependent on.
That's kind of what I got more about what I'm dependent on rather than how independent I am.
Okay. So then the question gets to be asked when you acknowledge that, how do I show I value my employer? How do I show I value my husband? And let me tell you, and I like that Sherry's going down this train. That's why these questions are here. When you value your employer, you show up on time.
If not early.
When you value your employer, you make progress in the assignments that have been given to you. Otherwise, you
Find another employer.
because you ain't got a job.
You do extra stuff.
You do extra stuff sometimes, so you get promoted. So you don't make $2 an hour forever. You stay until you're obligated to stay, and sometimes it's the employer, folks. That's when you at least show you value your employer. We just finished a lesson talking about the creator of the universe paying the price you couldn't pay, and we value him like the elf on the shelf. That's the emphasis of where we're going here. Brilliant, Sherry. Because the dependence suggests that if we value what we just finished valuing, we should be showing a gradual dependency and being pleased to say I'm dependent on my husband, I'm dependent on my job, I'm dependent on the goodwill of people to X and so. But remember, I think Brother Gene said earlier, I think that's even a question, even saying I need help. Nope. Now, I'll challenge that a little bit, and Steve, interrupt me if I get this wrong. In the Middle Ages, in the world, we had a society that was all about learning. So it's fine to ask questions because you expected that you were going to have a mentor, that somebody was going to be teaching you, was going to be spilling into you. That's the old law school, by the way. Before there was Harvard and Yale and Princeton and the Ivies, what there was is there was a learned scholar who would pour himself into you to teach you the law. And you would do all of the things that would help you to become expert at the law. And then at some point in time, you were accountable to teach it to someone else. So you asking for help and saying, I don't know how to do this, was perfectly fine centuries ago. But today's America, no, you look like a weakling, you look like a punk, and we're not okay with that. Other thoughts before we move to question 2?
Yes, sir. A fellow speaker at church a bazillion years ago. I only remember his last name, Pastor Orr, O-R-R. And he was sitting on the front, back in those days, it's how long ago, he was sitting on the front pew. We had pews. And somebody came up to him to share a concern. I don't remember what it was, okay? But immediately, out loud, not loudly, but out loud, he starts praying, oh Lord, bless him in this right away.
Right.
That was one of the greatest displays of dependence in a preacher I've ever seen.
Right.
And there was a dependence he had on the Lord, moment by moment by moment, out loud prayer.
Cool beans. And I can tell you on the horizon, that has been a thought about us at some point in time. Hey, Nate, can I put you on the spot?
Oh no.
I thought you'd do it anyway.
Good man, Charlie Brown. You've been a student away from home for a year.
Yeah.
What's your thought about independence right now versus where you were before you went to school?
Well, okay, so personally, I don't like a lot of work, so I like depending on other people.
Yeah.
Because it allows me to delegate tasks that I don't have to do.
Right.
Because that's tedious.
Yeah.
But I have found that I am just being more independent because I can't just like, hey, mom, want to cook dinner for me? So now I have to walk and need someone else to cook it.
He sounds like a promising American.
And by the way, we took all this down for your resume. I don't like a lot of work.
I like Nate's perspective on that, and I would say that if college happens the right way, that's going to change incrementally year by year, especially at the point when mom and dad go, "Okay, little bird, bye." Then you got to find a whole bunch of people to do stuff for you, and that is a challenge in current day America. So very, very cool. And we're going to ask you for stuff like that because the more away from home and the more exposed you are in the society, you're going to be able to give us some real good feedback about what the real world at this stage is like versus sometimes the makeup stuff we all remember from 80 years ago when college was one schoolroom and there were 80 kids in my class. I think there's an answer there unless Sarah hasn't put it up already. So at least in real people words, it may look like this. Independence may be the key driving force from toddler years to adulthood. We want to control our behavior, our course of action, and ultimately our destiny.
Yep.
What the toddler does, the first time the toddler says no. The first time the toddler says no, that tells us the toddler, by the way, you didn't teach your kid to say no to you. Why does your kid say no?
I heard you say it.
They heard you say it. And it worked. And so from a toddler, you want to control your own independence and your destiny. That's why you start with no. That ultimately leads to a spanking.
Isn't that something that we get taught, that whole concept we get taught from the Terminator?
Yes.
Yeah, there's no fake of what you make for yourself.
That's correct. And so we believe that I would be back, but also on top of that, I'm in control. I'm in control of my whole thing. Unless there's the multiverse of time travel, then that's a different whole wrinkle.
I'm so glad you bring that up almost every week.
Well, I have to talk about reality. So And Gene's already beginning to look for the number for the people with the nets and the white jackets. So we want to be independent from the time we're little kids. That's why we push back on mom and dad saying, don't do it. No. And that there's a whole element about this that we won't do it today about potty training. Why that's a challenge? Because of the no kind of aspect and attention seeking and other stuff. But that's for Psych 101. If you guys take that, you'll perhaps get into some of it. Second question. In what areas do you consider yourself proudly independent? In what areas do you consider yourselves proudly independent? Yes, sir.
I'm potty trained. So there, that's not even an issue since you brought it up.
That is information I don't know that I needed, but
You probably already did. You knew that.
I didn't necessarily, but now I'm thinking about it.
Being here to like
Yeah.
Or sooner.
respectful.
I'm being respectful to at our learned and aged brother. How fiercely and proudly independent are you?
I've already aired my dirty laundry. I mean, you know, and Preston already called me out on the whole setup thing, but I am letting that go for the summer because that kid's going to do it.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Who does most of the driving in your house?
that'd be me
Why would that be?
because he has a lead foot.
Because she has a control issue.
I'm a lot like Sarah.
In what way?
Since you're throwing it up there.
Our kids can tell us all the time.
Cause I'm kind of run everything, just do everything, and I get a little annoyed when somebody tries to put his opinion into it. Doing this for a while now, you're gonna be awake.
It's not related.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I know how to do this. This is how we do it.
Yeah.
You know,
You want it done right.
and Ben's got a lot of issues going on, but you know, it's hard for him to be involved in a lot of things for a while. And then when he's trying to shift his time when he's awake and stuff and tries to put, you know, say, I need to get involved in this. And I'm like, yeah, you're a day late, but dollar short. Sorry, I've already decided on that.
Yep.
Because I've been doing it for so long without any, you know, question about it too. So just gotta, yeah, I always think that I'm always right.
I want it done right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when you try to delegate to somebody else, they say, oh, what do you want to do?
I know better. They know better.
If somebody else wants to say something.
Okay.
I did that on purpose.
You know where that comes from, right? It comes from, well, if we do this, no. So I'm like, we might as well just say, why don't you throw out there what you would like first? And then I'll be happy to give you my opinion for whatever that's worth.
So
Everybody make a decision.
You know that experience of which you speak.
You wait.
Oh my.
Either. We do that just so we can say, but I did ask your opinion 3 times last week.
Yes, that's right. Because sometimes that isn't even a control arena. I asked you.
I did.
Right.
Didn't do it.
You didn't say. You just conceded. Right. And so, folks, we're having this discussion that's in some ways informal to when we hone in on 2 Corinthians 12, 7 through 10, it's going to make sense to you differently. Because what Paul says here is an anthem that is a mouthful that we don't understand, let alone practice well. Yes, sir.
In my work, I will confess to being
Yep.
fiercely independent. I don't want to, unless I absolutely have to, ask for help or something.
Gotcha.
I want them to believe that I can do things.
Yep.
Okay, and I've actually been called names that indicate that sort of expertise, and I'm not going to go there.
Mr. Wizard,
Yeah, well, not exactly, but still, the idea.
Mr.
is that-
Peabody.
So the independence that you're talking about here, as an American and in the workforce, I am very, very slow to say, I need help with this. And it may be a pride issue, and I'll acknowledge that. But that is an area where I am independent. I'm going to wait until I absolutely have to before I'll actually ask for help. So in my work.
Are you consciously saying, I'm not going to ask for help, I'm not going to ask for help? You just keep trying until you realize, yeah, I figured it.
Yeah, I'm going to keep on going and keep on trying stuff. It's the next thing I try is going to do it. The next thing I try is going to do it. This makes sense. Let's try this. And so finally, when it's I've tried everything that even makes sense. Some of the things that don't make sense, I'll go, okay, you people that made this software, how's it supposed to work? Because it's not. I can't figure it out. Okay. And we had a similar situation this morning. I was noticing something. I'm sorry, Sarah.
Apparently, this is like
Beat up
on Sarah.
Hey, happy Mother's Day. So there was something on her screen that I didn't see on on this other screen that's there for you, and it was like, wonder why that is. And I'm going, okay, I think I'm in the right meeting. Maybe I'm not. So I asked her to check, and she actually was in the wrong meeting. And so we fixed it. So I had to actually ask, though, what's going on? So we worked together as a team and solved the issue. But independent.
So let me throw out one for you, for me. So and many of you may not be aware of this. Some of you in the room are.
So good we can beat up on Preston now?
Yeah, exactly. And so some of you in the room are aware of this. And Bruce, you can help too, because you're aware of this one. My own conceit in this area has to do with music. But it also has to do specifically with vocalization in music. It is real easy for me to do it all and not ask anybody to contribute. I'm not getting any pushback for that. And I'm usually the authority about that. But over the years, I've learned that although I write the songs that make the whole world sing, I write the songs of love and special things. Music is not mine. I don't own it. It's bigger than I am. And some of you perhaps have had this experience, I have learned over the years to not own it by myself. I've learned to lend it. Now, I don't always do it well. That's my wife. I don't do it well. But I've learned to lend it so that people who have a like and a desire for music can get involved, whether it's choosing or singing or participating. They can do it now around me without me being an element of pure scorn. Don't ask my wife about that. But am I in the ballpark, Brother Bruce?
Yeah, no, you actually are. And I got real life on this one because I'm getting the echo, Sarah.
Okay, give me a second. Hold on a minute.
Okay. Yeah, when you were here the last time, every time Preston comes to Hawaii, we try to do music together. And matter of fact, I was telling our praise team just about this on Friday. So I think they're coming back early. Some of them are coming back early from the mainland so they can be here when you're here next. But you came in with a preconceived set of songs you wanted to do. And I remember we were trying, I don't remember which one it was, but we were trying one and it was awful. It just was awful. And I remember you kind of had set your jaw and we were going to go through that song and we were going to make it work if it killed us. And it just wasn't really good. And then I said something about, well, how about this? And you kind of wrinkled your nose and said, okay, we'll try it. And it ended up being good. And it actually was probably one of the better songs in the set. Forget, maybe it was Revelation song, I think maybe. And yeah, so there's definitely been some personal growth, brother.
I would share that in the past,
Yesterday?
oh no, oh no, from the time when I was where Nate is now, folks used to folks used to view me as Simon Cowell. So if you know who Simon Cowell is, the big joke used to be folks that were performing would find where I was in the audience and they would gauge their performance on somebody who was fiercely independent about a certain kind of skin. And some of my friends from school will tell stories about that. But today I'm different in that folks who hang out with me, do they not enjoy singing around me these days? I think you're a victim.
Yes.
Okay, there should have been more besides yes, but so that
Children were victims.
they made themselves victims. It's to say, fierce independence, ownership of a thing, is sometimes it's built into how we operate, and it's real difficult to let go, to let others find their way, and you help to shape, but not own it with a fierceness. It's really tough.
I've kind of back to work, but this is expanding it just a little bit. In the family and with a lot of folks that know me, I'm the resident techno geek. Okay. And if that hurts sometimes because Michaela found a smartphone by the curb in our front yard. And it was like, okay, all we have to do is get into this phone and find out whose it is, and we can get it back to them. Well, it had a smashed screen.
Mhm.
It looked like somebody had sat on it with their pocket. So it bent a little bit. And so I did everything I could. And she pulled 3 names out of the thing without even connecting it to anything but battery. But it was again, I can do this. I can do this. And you know what? I can't. I cannot get any more information out of that. And there's a QR code on the back that probably is going to tell us whose it is, because we did find on the front of it enough display came up saying track phone. There's the track phone. There's the QR code. Find the owner. But anyway, the point is, I'm the techno geek in the house. I got to figure this out. And sometimes I have to say, I can't.
Okay. Hey, Pastor Bruce, for many years you were the chief cook and bottle washer with a church in Richmond. Can you shed some light on some of that experience in terms of being fiercely and proudly independent and owning those things in which you were involved, or those things of which you shepherded?
Yeah, I think the reality that I came to was that, again, you can only do so much on your own. And there's lots of times where maybe you can do it better than other people. But John Maxwell actually wrote a whole book called Failing Forward. And, you just have to come to a realization that maybe the person that when you finally realize you can't do 19 things on a Sunday, that when you give those away, it may not be done to your standard. But did it get done? And I finally had to adopt the idea, and you'll hear me say this sometimes. We got to the end of the day and nobody got hurt. And that had to be a standard. It wasn't the standard necessarily that I started with, but it's like at the end of the day, we all got out alive, and that had to be kind of my set. And so, but over time, what happens is those ones that you handed those things off to got better and better, and then they owned it, and then you kind of felt like, oh, well, I'd have to be chasing after them now. So it was a growth experience for me to just say, you got to let go. And ultimately, at the end of the day, the team will be better because of it. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but that's kind of what I got from that.
And certainly in terms of the society and the culture and the support, yeah, absolutely. And we haven't brought it back, and we're not doing that so much, but I want to put emphasis on this passage. Paul had a right to talk smack. Paul had a right to strut around. Paul had a right to be able to say, I've had experiences that none of you have. I was left near death. I was, and certainly some of this is going to happen later. I was shipwrecked. I was snake bitten. I was beaten. I was in prison. And for the most part, the Lord has made me rubber and everything else is glue and nothing sticks to me. He could have been walking around boasting that way, but he wasn't. What he was boasting in is that Jesus brought me through this.
That's right. Amen.
Jesus brought me through this. And that's a really tough American horse pill to swallow. Because we've been taught by our parents sometimes, take credit, boy, take credit, girl, for what you do. Stand up, be proud about it, be proud, fierce Americans. I would still say that those tenets apply, but less so when it comes to your evaluation of Jesus and what he did that's amazing for us. There, you got to do the thing that Steve says is daunting. You can't take any credit. And we try to. More than we want to admit. And we're going to take a look as we go through here. But fun thing about hopefully this study is we're going to take a look at not only your lives, but the lives of people who went, I think I got this. I got this. I know how to nail this. And you're going to see how it goes horribly awry. You probably do the same things yourselves. We probably do the same things. I think, let me see. It's closing in on yet magic time. So there's an answer up here that may help to help you think a little bit, and this will kind of close our day before I ask you for any comments or thoughts. I choose my employment. I choose my significant others. I choose my friends. I choose my daily activities. I choose where I go and why I do what I do. I'm independent as long as I'm mentally competent and healthy. Right? Mm-hmm. That's why a lot of us fear potentially dementia, Alzheimer's, mental illness. The thing that you've heard Bruce Willis going through, aphasia, is particularly scary for a lot of folks because that suggests that maybe the inputs coming in are solid and practical, but your ability to respond to them is difficult. It's going to be miscommunicated. In some ways, a little bit like autism. Right? So we believe as long as we're mentally capable, for the most part, we're independent in all things. That's a mouthful. You guys agree with that? Just because it's written, you don't have to agree.
I think we believe that, yes. That's not true, but we believe it.
This is kind of one of those studies where you kind of like going, huh? It becomes very convicting.
I hope so.
You know?
I hope it is. You know, and I hope so when you say that makes sense, because if this is your mantra, I'm going to say something very strong, and Steve will probably agree with me. I could be wrong. If this resonates for you, this is your religion. And on the throne of this religion is put your picture there. Right? This is your religion. And folks, I would challenge you that church people struggle with this not being their religion/faith. I have faith in me and no one else. I didn't even get there. But my practice is about me every day. In fact, our kids usually want to get old enough so they can do what, Michaela? Thinking. And independent may mean I siphon off of them for a few years, but eventually I skedaddle from underneath their umbrella. And I get all the stuff that they got for me coming, and I have it by myself. And I don't know that that's changed and I don't even know that that's an American thing. I think that it is a developmental thing. Is kids want to not be kids at some point in time. And that's why certainly the ages in our society matter. I was at Food Lion the other day. Guy asked, a young boy said, how you doing? I said, better than I deserve. He said, why did you say that? I said, because as long as I'm in right standing with Jesus, it's a good day. He said, thank you for saying that. And then he followed it up with, I'm going to be 21 tomorrow. Now, appreciate that. Why did he say that to me? He didn't even necessarily comment on what I just said. What was important to him is himself.
Tomorrow he can go into the ABC store.
Today.
And he said to me, I will be able to celebrate like a 21-year-old. And I said, that may be good. I said, just don't do anything that doesn't honor the Lord. Square.
There you go.
Cool. I abide by the Huey Lewis principle. It's to be square. But here's the other thing. Sometimes my philosophy is this. If I only see you behind one time, then I'm going to leave you with something I may never see you again. I don't have to deal with like what we all feel. If I tell my friend, I got to look my friend in the eye and say, oh, I told you to come to church. Oh, you're not happy with me. See you one time. I'm going to say something to you because I may not see you a whole nother time. It's easy. That's easy evangelical waters. Pretty guy, calendar dude.
I keep looking for him too when I go to the store. I do to see if I ever just to see how he's doing, but I haven't seen him since.
21-year-old kid. He told me what was important for him in being 21. It's a benchmark in his life that says, I get to do. Now, what comes after I get to do? I don't know, but he was looking forward to it.
Mhm.
Even if it was, I get to drink a whole lot. Right? Because we look to be independent about stuff. And it, in many ways, is our faith. It is our religion. How we operate. Yes, sir.
The other thing that happens with that milestone is if other people know that you're of that age, then you feel like they're going to look at you differently and you're going to be counted as an adult as opposed to a kid anymore. And well, I'm finding that kids are getting older for me.
Yes, sir.
Exactly.
Yeah, I always chuckle at Bruce's story. Bruce will come back to Williamsburg, and he'll be here next month. So he and Christina will be here next month. And usually when he comes, his dad wants him to attend church with him in the church he grew up in. Now, do you know what happens when Bruce goes to the church he grew up
They
in?
pinch his cheeks.
Because you may be 21 in chronological age, but for the most part, you're still Nate. You're still Michaela. You're still Red. Just a lot more mouth, but you're still Delaney. So in your head, you've crossed the threshold. The folks who know you, you're Nate the adult, but you're Nate. You're Nate. So I'm done for this week. Any comments? Any follow ups on that?
It's probably still by and large true, even if it's not. Like for the 21-year-old kid at the grocery store, because everybody's still operating with that fiercely independent. So for the adult interacting with the 21-year-old, they're still just a kid. 21. What do you know?
What was in my head that I didn't say to that kid? Because I just said, I love Jesus. And then the wrong thing would be, but you're still 5 years old. That would have been the wrong thing to say to that kid.
18.
Pretty much.
Or 16.
And that's because a lot of us in the room are far beyond 21. So when somebody says 21, we're going,
What to do?
what do you do? Nope, we don't say that at all. That is TV land. We look for 21 as a major threshold, and we look forward to you crossing it. Lord, help me with that last. Other thoughts. We're gonna look at the real life problem of he must increase, I must decrease. We're gonna take a look at that pretty aggressively as we go through this study. So please be aware when Sarah says some of this is convicting, some of this is bothersome, some of this is going to stay with you for a bit. That's what it should do. So that every day is a new day and an opportunity to go, what does the Lord say I need to be about? How do I do something that builds up my kingdom account as opposed to just getting the day happening as splendiferously as I like it to happen?